The shadow of the Sultan stretched across 1,000 years of history, breaking the walls that once seemed eternal. Constantinople had fallen, and the Ottoman tide was rising without pause. But near Targovica, the air grew cold. 20,000 souls stood silent, impaled on sharpened stakes. This was no battlefield. It was a message written in blood, a warning that some lands are never truly conquered. Across the Golden Horn, the young Sultan Mehmed II watched the last shield of Byzantium. He was a man of iron will, determined to open the gates of Europe. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI stood firm, choosing his people over his life. The final assault began, a collision of empires where the old world met the fire of the new, changing history forever. The Janissaries, forged in the fires of discipline, surged forward like an unstoppable wave. In the chaos of hand-to-hand combat, the last emperor fell among his men, refusing to retreat. When Mehmed entered the Hagia Sophia, the heart of Christendom stopped beating. It was a blow that echoed through Europe, a seismic shift that signaled the dawn of an Islamic era in the Balkans. Mehmed's vision reached beyond the horizon, aiming for the very walls of Rome itself. The fall of the city was merely the catalyst for a new superpower. Through the Devshirme system, he created the most effective infantry the world had ever seen. With massive bombards and advanced engineering, the Ottoman state became a centralized machine of war, possessing resources that no Christian prince could match. In the year 1442, young Vlad and his brother Radu were cast into the lion's den. As hostages at the Sultan's court, they learned the language of their captors and the art of intrigue. For Vlad, this was the forge of his soul. He watched as Christian princes bent their knees, and he learned that power is maintained only through absolute, terrifying loyalty. While in captivity, the news of his father's murder and his brother's burial alive shattered Vlad's world. This trauma became the foundation of his legendary cruelty. Returning to Wallachia in 1456, he reclaimed his throne with the help of John Hunyadi. He was no longer a boy. He was a predator who realized that to survive the Ottoman storm, he must become the storm. Hunyadi had halted the Sultan at Belgrade, but Wallachia remained a land trapped between two fires. As Hungary struggled to restrain the Ottoman advance, internal chaos reigned in Vlad's domain. Boyar families traded loyalties like currency, shifting between the Sultan and the king. Vlad knew that if his country was to survive as a bastion of resistance, he would have to break the nobility first. Radical changes began the moment Vlad took the throne. He relied on strict centralization and the merciless suppression of any who dared rebel. For a border state, there was no room for weakness. He transformed Wallachia into a hard barrier against Mehmed's path into Europe. Meanwhile, the Serbian despotate faced its final hour, exhausted by internal strife and the relentless pressure of the Ottoman war machine. In 1459, Smederevo fell, and with it, the last stronghold of independent Serbia vanished. Mehmed did not just seize the land, he dismantled the elite and turned a kingdom into a mere province. By the following year, the Balkan shield was shattered. Wallachia now stood alone in a tightening vice as the Sultan turned his hungry gaze toward his next disobedient vassal. The fall of Smederevo was the beginning of a massive restructuring. Mehmed sought to eliminate every remnant of Christian autonomy, replacing disloyal lords with a controlled periphery. Mass deportations began, moving craftsmen and the spiritual elite to the heart of the empire. By weakening the local centers of opposition, the Sultan created a new social base for his capital, ensuring that resistance would have no roots. The second phase was a brutal military cleansing of the unstable mountain regions. Ottoman detachments hunted the Haiduks and Serbian lords who dared to organize resistance. strongholds were reduced to rubble, and the population was forced to acknowledge the Sultan's absolute authority. There was no place to hide from the reach of Istanbul, as the empire systematically erased the old world to build the new. The third step was the total restructuring of the land. Ancient feudal holdings were transferred to the Sultan's loyal sepahis, and monastic estates were secularized. By 1460, the transformation was complete. Serbia had become a stable province, its political elite eliminated, and its statehood a memory. The Balkan shield was gone, and the road to the north lay open, guarded only by Dracula. The fall of Serbia forced Vlad into a policy of internal discipline known as the Great Cleansing. At Easter in 1459, he gathered the boyars suspected of disloyalty. Some were executed on the spot, while others watched their families perish. This act of calculated cruelty established a new order. From that moment, the prince's power was absolute, and fear became the primary instrument of state. Vlad's reputation as an uncompromising defender of Christianity was forged in blood. He tolerated no betrayal, combining political foresight with terrifying resolve. In 1461, Mehmed II delivered a blunt ultimatum to Targovica. The Sultan demanded the payment of the jizya tax and 500 boys for the Janissary Corps. It was a demand for total submission, designed to strip Wallachia of its future and its soul. Dracula understood that accepting the Sultan's terms meant the end of independence. When the Ottoman envoys arrived, he turned the diplomatic mission into a horrific demonstration of power. He ordered the men to remove their turbans as a sign of respect. When they refused, citing their religious laws, Vlad's response was cold and final. He decided that if their turbans were so precious, they should stay forever. The envoys were seized, and their turbans were nailed directly into their skulls. Those who survived the agony were sent back to the Sultan as a living message. Vlad was no longer a vassal. He was an enemy who would not bow. This act of defiance made war inevitable. He knew the Sultan would come with fire, but Dracula was prepared to strike the first blow. Realizing he must strike before the Sultan could assemble his army, Vlad looked to the winter. The Danube, usually a barrier, was locked in thick ice. Under the cover of a moonless night, Dracula led his men across the frozen surface, bypassing Ottoman outposts. This was not a raid of desperation, but a calculated campaign to destroy the infrastructure that would support the coming invasion. Vlad's forces moved like ghosts through the Bulgarian lands, crushing garrisons and burning supply depots. They targeted the very settlements that provisioned Mehmed's war machine. Ottoman chroniclers recorded the suddenness of the blow, as entire regions were left defenseless. Territories meant to be the springboard for the Sultan's conquest were reduced to smoking ruins, proving that Dracula could carry the war into the heart of the empire. In February 1462, Vlad sent a chilling report to King Matthias Corvinus. He recorded the death of 23,884 Turks and Tatars with surgical precision. To prove his success, he reportedly sent the severed heads of his enemies to the Hungarian court. He was the southern shield of Europe, a ruler who fought with a brutality that even the Sultan feared. Mehmed II realized he was not facing a common prince, but a strategist capable of damaging the prestige of the Sultanate. In the spring, he announced a punitive expedition of unprecedented scale. Over 150,000 soldiers were gathered, including the elite Janissaries and the most advanced artillery of the age. The objective was simple: the total destruction of Vlad and the annexation of Wallachia. As the massive Ottoman army advanced, Vlad adopted a scorched earth strategy. He harbored no illusions about a direct confrontation. He ordered every village burned and every well poisoned. The population was evacuated to the mountains, leaving the Sultan's forces with nothing but ash and thirst. Behind Mehmed marched a grand army, but ahead lay a dead land that offered no food, no water, and no mercy. Constant partisan attacks wore down the Ottoman spirit. Night assaults and ambushes in narrow passes became the norm. Vlad's men destroyed reconnaissance units and supply trains, turning the march into a nightmare of paranoia. The Sultan's soldiers encountered hunger and relentless violence at every turn. Despite the overwhelming numbers, the Ottoman machine began to grind to a halt in the desolate, hostile landscape of the north. Near Targoviste, the exhausted Ottoman army made camp. Vlad saw his chance for a killing blow. He assembled 7,000 of his most loyal warriors for a daring night attack. His goal was the Sultan's tent. If he could eliminate Mehmed, the war would end in a single night. Using intelligence gathered from the camp, Dracula prepared to strike at the very heart of the empire. Under the cover of darkness, the Wallachians broke into the camp, spreading chaos and fire. Vlad personally led the charge, his warriors cutting through the forward units with terrifying speed. In the smoke and confusion, they searched for the Sultan's tent, desperate to find their target. The battle became a nighttime slaughter, where the line between victory and death was blurred by the flickering flames. The Sultan's personal guard intervened just in time, preventing the Wallachians from reaching Mehmed. High-ranking commanders fell, but the central objective remained out of reach. As the fires illuminated the battlefield, Vlad realized the advantage of darkness was lost. To avoid encirclement, he ordered a retreat. The attack failed to kill the Sultan, but it proved that no one was safe from the reach of the Impaler. When Mehmed finally approached the capital, he expected a siege. Instead, he was met by the most horrific sight of the century, the forest of the Impaled. 20,000 bodies stood on sharpened stakes, arranged in perfect military rows. It was a silent, rotting army of Turks, Tatars, and traitors. This was Vlad's final message to the conqueror of Constantinople. This land belongs to the dead. The psychological blow was devastating. The Janissaries, who had conquered empires, felt a primal fear. They stood before an enemy who did not just fight, but sought to destroy the very soul of his opponents. German chroniclers spoke of the wind moving the dead bodies, creating a ghastly illusion of life. Mehmed realized that he was not fighting a prince, but a man who had mastered terror. The Sultan convened a council with his pashas to assess the damage. The loss of combat effectiveness was too great to ignore. In a rare move, the conqueror of Constantinople decided to retreat without his trophies. He acknowledged that it was impossible to take land from a man capable of such horrific deeds. The campaign of 1462 ended, but the shadow of Dracula remained. Retreat did not bring peace. Wallachia was a broken land, its crops destroyed and its people terrified. In this vacuum stepped Radu the Handsome, Vlad's younger brother. Raised in the same Ottoman court, Radu had learned a different lesson: to rule through stability rather than fear. He offered the boyars a way out of the nightmare, promising a return to order under the Sultan's grace. Radu's campaign was one of politics, not steel. He courted the noble families who had survived Vlad's purges. They saw in Radu a chance to end the era of terror. One by one, the fortresses opened their gates. Vlad found himself isolated, his support among the peasantry withered by blood and hunger. The man who had defied the Sultan was now being hunted by his own. By the end of autumn, Vlad was forced to flee across the Carpathians. He sought refuge with his former ally, King Matthias Corvinus, hoping for a new army. But the king had other plans. Based on forged letters suggesting a secret alliance with the Sultan, Corvinus ordered Vlad's arrest. The Impaler became a prisoner, and Wallachia fell under the rule of Radu, becoming a loyal Ottoman puppet. While Vlad languished in captivity, the Ottoman tide continued to sweep across the Balkans. Mehmed took advantage of the conflicts between Hungary and Venice. Bosnia, once an independent European state, was swiftly annexed. King Stefan was executed, and the land was turned into an Ottoman province. The fall of Bosnia gave the Sultan a strategic springboard to pressure the southern borders of the Hungarian kingdom. The last great obstacle in the south was George Castrioti, known as Skanderbeg. For 25 years, this genius of guerrilla warfare held the Sultan at bay. But in 1468, Skanderbeg died, and with him, the unity of the Albanian resistance crumbled. Mehmed methodically captured city after city, breaking the final citadel of Christian defiance. The front was cracking, and the road north was clear. With Serbia destroyed, Bosnia annexed, and Albania exhausted, the Christian world was in retreat. In a moment of desperation, Matthias Corvinus decided to use Vlad as a weapon once more. After a decade of captivity, the Impaler was given a small army to reclaim his throne. He drove out the Ottoman garrisons, but he returned to a land that was divided and bled dry. Vlad's final reign lasted only months. Surrounded by enemies and betrayed by his own boyars, he was killed in battle. Some say it was an ambush, others say he fell in open combat. His head was severed and sent to Istanbul, where it was displayed on a stake for all to see. The man who used fear as a weapon had finally met his end. The final bastion of the south was the fortress of Shkodra. In 1478, the Sultan himself led the assault. Massive artillery batteries pounded the walls for weeks, but the defenders held on in total isolation. They were a mix of Venetian and Albanian forces, fighting without food or hope. It was a desperate stand against the inevitable tide of the Ottoman conquest of the Balkans. By 1479, the situation shifted from the battlefield to the negotiating table. Venice, exhausted by decades of war and receiving no help from the rest of Europe, signed a peace treaty with the Sultan. Shkodra was surrendered, marking the end of the resistance. The final piece of the Balkan puzzle was in place, and the Ottoman Empire had achieved its long-sought goal of total dominance. The conquest of the Balkans was complete. What was once a mosaic of Christian kingdoms was now a unified Ottoman territory. The fall of Shkodra signaled the end of an era. The Sultan's shadow now loomed over the heart of Europe, and the memory of those who resisted, like Vlad and Skanderbeg, became legends of a lost world. The map of history had been rewritten. History remembers Vlad Dracula not just for his cruelty, but for the impossible choices he made. He was a ruler who understood that in a world of giants, the small must become monsters to survive. His methods were horrific, but his goal was the preservation of his state. In the end, he was consumed by the very darkness he used to hold back the night. As the 15th century drew to a close, the Ottoman Empire stood as the world's undisputed superpower. The bells of the Balkans had been silenced, replaced by the call to prayer. The struggle of Vlad and his contemporaries was over, leaving behind a legacy of blood and stone. The road to Rome remained open, and the world waited to see what would come next.